In this lesson, I'd like to talk about JavaScript access modifiers. Included in this is the idea of private object variables. My children, when they go to school, they're taught that there are some parts of your body that you're not supposed to touch, and strangers shouldn't touch them. Similarly, in objects, when you're doing object-oriented programming, there are certain methods as well as attributes that shouldn't be directly touched, and they can be protected and made private so that you can't do that. In a previous lesson, I talked about the idea of encapsulation, and this relates to the idea of private variables. And under encapsulation, we protect the access to our variables of our object by making people go through getters and setters. That way they can't do things like accidentally set a value to be empty, or in the case of an account owner for a bank, you can't accidentally make the account owner a number. And then here's an example of how you would implement that UML class diagram in JavaScript. In this case, I'm just focusing on the account owner, and I have a getter and setter for that. And this is what the getter and setter looks like when we implement it in JavaScript. The setter is the more interesting method here because it checks the variable that's being passed in, make sure it's not empty, and make sure it's of type string. So it puts some really good protections around the variable. Nevertheless, with this code as it is right now, a person could still make an instance of this and then directly interact with the variable or the attribute, and this could be a bad thing because then you're bypassing the setter, which provides some protections against doing things like setting it equal to nothing. So related to this lesson, one of the things we'd like to do is make it so you can't directly access things this way and force people to use the getters or setters. Okay, so let's use an example to work with to demonstrate the use of private variables or accessibility modifiers. All right, so up at the top of this class diagram, I have the idea of a pet. Let's go ahead and write the code for this in JavaScript and then iteratively improve it until it's protected. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is open up Visual Studio Code, and I will create a file, and I will save this file as, let's see, I will call it petexample.html. There we go. I'll do an exclamation point, and then that starts my document. All right, let's go ahead and start with that pet class. So I'll say within a script tag, I'll say class pet. And then it only has one attribute, which is pet name. To save some time and space, I won't add a constructor. And then let's go ahead and use this. Let opet equals new pet. So we're just getting some practice with creating classes and objects. And then here's the thing that we don't like doing. So I'll say this can be bad. Directly accessing the variable. All right, and here's how we do it. opet.spetName, so the string pet name equals Dave the cat. And let's go ahead and test to make sure this is working. I'll hit save, and I'll use the Go Live extension, the live server extension that has been installed. This will pop open a web browser, and it came up in my other screen. So I will bring that right over so where you can see it. There we go. So it did what we expected, but we don't think this is a very good idea because we directly accessed a variable. All right, so let's go ahead and start to improve this by adding setters and getters. So first thing I'll do is I'll add set pet name. And I'll say this dot spet name equals this thing that we're passing in. And then for the getter, I'll just say return this dot s pet name. All right, let's go down below and make use of our new setters and getters. I'll say pet dot set pet name, and I'll pass in this time Sam the cat. Let's go ahead and test the getter now. So I'll say alert pet dot get pet name. All right, let's go ahead and hit save, and in the other window it pops up. It shows Sam the cat, then Dave the cat. Okay, so this part is working correctly, but this is still exposed. So we have a preferred way to set our internal variable and a preferred way to get that, but this thing is still hanging out in the wind. So let's go ahead and change that. So what I'd like to do now is put a little comment here and say private variable, meaning we don't want people to that are creating objects of this variable or objects of this type to directly access that variable. And the way that we do that is by simply changing it from whatever it was to putting a pound sign in front of it. Now every time we talk about this variable in our program, or at least within our class, we have to refer to it with the pound sign in front of it. It's basically its new name. So when I'm setting it, I will use that. And when I'm retrieving it, I will use that. And now I will hit save. All right, Sam the cat, Dave the cat. Okay. You might be wondering at this point why everything still worked. And so let's first talk about the first use of setting the name of the cat or the pet. So when I called this method, it went and it passed the name in there, and it correctly assigned this. It didn't look like anything changed. The curious thing then is, why did the second part continue to work? Well, the answer is that I didn't put a pound sign in front of here, and JavaScript is very free and easy about setting variables, and so this is technically a completely different variable than the one that has a pound sign in front of it. So if I put a pound sign there and a pound sign there to try to access that variable, let's watch what happens. Okay. Even though I have live server running, nothing happened that indicates that a JavaScript error occurred in the browser, because I should see an alert pop-up box happen. And that would have popped up over my Visual Studio Code. All right, so let's go ahead and do inspect. Console. Here's my error message. Private field, this must be declared in an enclosing class, line 28. In short, it's saying we cannot set this variable, a private variable, outside of the class itself. And we can't, and if I fix that and get rid of that line, if I just try to do this, this would also say, hey, you can't read this thing outside of the context of the class itself.